So, back in September 2025, one single presidential directive targeting Portland, Oregon, well, it kicked off this huge fight over federal power. We're going to break down exactly what went down and why you should care.
Okay, so this whole thing kicked off with a social media post on a Saturday morning. And look, this wasn't just some casual statement. This was a direct order to deploy the U.S. military on domestic soil. The really wild part, it authorized full force, a term that, immediately set off alarm bells because here's the thing. It has no actual standard definition in Pentagon protocols.
Right, so how did we even get here? I mean, ordering troops into an American city. To really get what was happening with this directive, you've got to look at the chain of events that led right up to it. It wasn't random.
You can actually see a really clear step-by-step buildup. It really starts after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. That's when the administration's rhetoric just ramped way up. And then, this is key, came the legal move, designating Antifa a domestic terrorist organization. See, that created the official justification they needed. And get this, by the time the order was even made public, federal forces were already on the move, quietly positioning themselves in Portland.
And this brings us right to the heart of the conflict, really. There was this fundamental disagreement about what was actually going on in Portland. The whole justification for sending in troops, it all hinged on one very specific version of reality.
So the administration was painting this picture of a city just completely in crisis. I mean, they used phrases like war-ravaged and said it was besieged by domestic terrorists. The goal here was pretty clear. Frame it in a way that makes an extraordinary military response seem, well, necessary, instead of completely out of place, which it otherwise would have been.
But, and this is a big but, the local data told a completely different story. A report from the Major Cities Chiefs Association showed that, far from being a city descending into chaos, violent crime in Portland had actually dropped, and not by a little, by a pretty significant 17% in the first half of the year.
So you've got this total disconnect, right? The White House is describing a city under siege, a war zone. Meanwhile, reporters who are actually there, on the ground, are seeing people jogging, riding their bikes, just enjoying a sunny fall day. It was like they were talking about two completely different places.
Okay, so how did Oregon's leaders react? Well, they responded fast, and they were all on the same page. From their point of view, this wasn't some kind of rescue mission. To them, it looked a lot more like an invasion.
And I mean, the opposition was totally unified. Yeah, the governor, the mayor, the state's entire congressional delegation, every single key official in Oregon came out with a united front. They were all directly contradicting the president's assessment and flat out rejecting his order.
Governor Tina Kotek basically shot down the entire premise. She said flat out there is no threat here. And what's more, her office hadn't received any federal information about this mission. That points to a complete, and you have to think probably intentional, breakdown in communication.
Then you have the mayor's response, which really became the defining quote of the whole local position. Mayor Keith Wilson didn't just refute the president's order, he went even further. He actually asked people to just imagine what would have happened if the federal government had sent engineers or teachers instead of what he called a fruitless show of force.
And Oregon's members of Congress, they saw this whole thing as a political trap. Senator Merkley literally warned people don't take the bait. The belief was that the real goal was to provoke a conflict, to create some violent images for the cameras, to manufacture the very crisis the troops were supposedly there to stop. So you got to understand, this wasn't just another political squabble. No, this directive immediately set off a full-blown constitutional showdown about the legal limits of a president's power.
And right at the heart of that whole issue is this really foundational American law, the Posse Comitatus Act. It's been around for over a century, and it exists for one specific reason, to draw a very clear line between the military and civilian law enforcement.
Now, the administration's only possible legal loophole here would be the Insurrection Act, but that thing is very rarely used, and invoking it has this incredibly high bar. It's usually reserved for an actual, literal insurrection or a total breakdown of law and order, which, frankly, nobody on the ground in Oregon thought was even close to happening.
And this is so critical. This wasn't some new, uncharted legal territory. Just recently, a federal judge had ruled on a nearly identical case in Los Angeles, and that ruling provided a really clear legal precedent against what the administration was doing. The judge found that a similar deployment had, in fact, violated the Posse Comitatus Act.
So why does any of this matter? I mean, it was just one weekend in Portland, right?
Well, it matters because it brings up these huge fundamental questions. It's a direct challenge to the balance of power between states and the federal government. It risks turning the military into a political tool. It could have a chilling effect on free speech. And maybe the scariest part, it runs the risk of starting the exact kind of violence it claims it's there to stop.
And when you boil it all down, what happened in Portland forces all of us to face this really fundamental question about power and authority in the U.S. Because when a president and a governor have completely different ideas of what a crisis is, who gets to decide when to call in the troops? In a country that's divided, where one person's protest is another person's insurrection, the answer to that question could really define the future of American democracy.